Hello and welcome to the bonsai garden. Today I'm continuing to work on my junipers. I've got here my Juniper chinensis X Media Gold, I believe it might be. And I mentioned in my previous video that not all junipers are made equal in terms of suitability for bonsai. And this is one of those examples. You can see here that the foliage can be quite sort of leggy and long, and it's not, for example, as compact as something like a Chinese juniper. Now, I've already done some work on this tree. I've been through and I've removed some wire that was on there that has left a little bit of scarring in places and was biting in quite badly. That wire has been on there perhaps a year, and this particular tree has been a little bit neglected on my benches. It's actually one of my earlier bonsai attempts, and it was actually inspired by a Bjorn Bjorholm ICN video where he goes through and he takes nursery junipers and he transforms them into little shohin bonsai. And if you haven't seen that video, it's really worth your while going and having a look at it. It's a really good series of videos. I think there are now 3 of them in the series. Anyway, I've been through and I've removed the wire from here. There is some browning in here which needs some attention. All I'm going to do is just pick off the sort of brown needles, and then I'm just going through, and I have already done a little bit of trimming of the foliage, and I'm just really trying to bring the thing back in. It's getting quite long. The new growth is very straight on there. There's no sort of interest in there. Everything is sort of long, straight growth. And what I want is I want to add a bit more shape in there. I want to bring the canopy in much tighter and try and encourage some back budding. Now, because this is quite a sort of leggy, long foliage, sort of sparse foliage type of juniper, I don't know how successful I'm going to be in doing that, but I'm certainly going to give it a go. So in here I have got some browning of the foliage, and it's just tips within there, and I think it's a combination of the drought that we had and also perhaps a bit of shading out. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly go through the tree and tidy that up. So these tips are now dead. They're browned off and look a little bit unsightly, and I'm literally just going to go through and just pick off the ends of those, just as a bit of a tidying up exercise really. Just a little bit unsightly, and just make the tree look a little better just by removing those. And if I just twist those, they'll just come away in my hand quite easily. So this isn't anything about the design of the tree or styling. This is just purely a maintenance task of just tidying up the tree. I'd say it's a spring cleaning job, but it's currently autumn, or we're just on the cusp of autumn. As I said, this isn't a styling thing, this is just purely a cosmetic tidy up. One of the things about this particular juniper is that it's a variegated variety, which means that we've got the yellow and the green on the same plant. What that means is there isn't as much chlorophyll in the yellow parts, and therefore it doesn't generate the same energy from photosynthesis as a plant that isn't variegated. That means it will grow slower, and in fact this has been quite a slow growing plant. I've had it about 4 years now, and this is the first time I've done any real major work on it since it was initially styled and put into this pot. And it's a mica drum pot. I think it was about 30 centimeters across, and I think I found that on eBay. And I find that eBay is a good place if you're looking to buy pots. My favourite potter, Tom Butterworth, sells his pots on eBay, and he usually puts batches of those up about every 2 months. Now, I did notice that this time he'd created a lot of pots, put those up, but I believe that he may have had some difficulty selling them this time, and I don't know if perhaps that's due to the cost of living crisis. People are sort of tightening their belts, they're on a budget or concerned about the jobs. So I'm not sure a great many of those sold on eBay, and he now has them on his website, TB Bonsai Pots, I believe it is. I'll put a link in the description so you can take a look at those. It does design some excellent pots with a very nice sort of wabi-sabi feel to them that are particularly good for Shohin bonsai. Definitely worth a look, particularly if you're in the UK. So I've been through here now, and I've removed, I think, the majority of the browned off tips. And the next job then is to try and bring some of the foliage in a bit. And I've already been round some of the pads and done that to a certain extent, and removed a couple of odd branches here and there. But I'm just going to really continue that process now, making assessments as to what's going to be kept and what we can lose. So it's a little bit frustrating, this tree, because we have areas where the foliage has grown quite thick, but it sort of tends to grow far thicker than is probably good for it, and shades out some of this interior. And I think that's why we've got some of the brown tips on there. And at the same time, there are areas of the tree that look a bit sparse, and it'd be good to try and get some back budding on there. Try and organise these pads. Well, try and organise the foliage into pads, really. And perhaps remove some of these branches that are not particularly helping. One of the things I am doing is I'm going around the tree, and where I can see that there has been growth, like here for example, I'm cutting out some of that growth just to try and bring the foliage in a bit, try and make the tree a bit more compact. So if you look at each bit of foliage as though it were a fan, I'm trying to pinch out or cut out some of the middle of that. And part of my thinking there is that first of all, I'm reducing the amount of foliage that's on the tree. The second is that those are apical shoots, and therefore they will have the hormone auxin in them, telling those branches and shoots to extend outwards. And by removing those, what I'm trying to do is promote the growth further back into the tree, and also hopefully promote some back budding so that we get some buds coming back along here and get more foliage in these sparser looking bits of the tree. I am also going through the tree and making design decisions about whether I'm keeping certain branches or not. Some of them I can wire into alternative positions, others maybe surplus to requirement. And so here, for example, I've got a branch which comes down. It's got a bit of nice shaping it that I put in with some wire. But at the end here, I've got the branches all coming out and sort of radiating out in a nice fan shape there. What I've got is a branch growing upwards in there. And so I'm just going to nip that out. So I've got a flatter bit of foliage on the end there, a pad if you will. I'm also coming in again with some of these and just nipping out some of the foliage on the end there. And also some of this is a little bit awkward, it's upward growing or growing back in towards the centre of the tree. I might be able to do something with wiring for some of those, but I'm also wanting to sort of thin things out a little bit. I will apply some wire to this at some point, perhaps not today, but this stretch here is quite straight after this nice bend and curve here. So what I probably do is put some curves in there, and that's another way of sort of shortening the look of the branch by putting some bends and curves into it. I've got a little bit of brown foliage in here, so I'm just pinching out the tips of those. Not doing anything for the tree, and it just looks a little bit unsightly, so take that out. And so it's the same process all around the tree. I'm looking at pinching out the ends of the growth to try and promote back budding further back into the tree, and I'm also looking at where things are a bit dense, where they might need thinning out, or where there are branches growing in places that are not helpful. I've also taken out a little bit of crotch growth, so growth that's appearing sort of in the elbow between branches, growing in the wrong place. I'll just see if I can find some examples. Just in here, it's not the most offensive example, but just in here we've got a little bit of foliage that's growing, and it's in the join between two branches, so that's not really ever going to be of any use. So that's crotch growth. I've taken that out. If I look just behind that, there's another example. There's some buds and some growth in there, right in the middle of where those two branches join. And again, just behind that, some there. Take that out. And anything that's a bit low down on the branch, so close to a junction, I'm taking that out as well. What I'm trying to do is make a clear separation of where the branches are. And if you've got things growing in those junctions, they sort of clutter up the design. We've got some growth in here that's growing back in towards the centre of the tree. That's not going to help. So there is a list of things that you should consider removing when you're trimming your tree. That includes dead branches, anything that's growing straight up or straight down, which doesn't look particularly natural. You want to try and avoid bar branches, so branches where you've got, or trunks where you've got branches coming out on opposite sides of the trunk. It looks a little bit unnatural. What you want is a bit of asymmetry in the tree. Also, stepped branches, where you've got branches growing immediately one above the other. Again, that might look a little bit unnatural and weird, so you might want to consider removing those. Also, where you've got multiple branches emerging from one point, a lot of people get a bit overexcitable about the idea of inverse taper. Now, I was reading a book by Michael Hagedorn, American bonsai professional who trained in Japan, and he's written a book called, I believe, Bonsai Heresy, or Bonsai Heretic, in which he challenges a number of common thoughts, assumptions and practices in bonsai. I don't know if he did that just to be intentionally provocative and to sell more books, but certainly he talks in there about the fact that there are trees in nature which have inverse taper, and it doesn't always mean that you end up with an ugly tree. So I think perhaps people can be a little bit overzealous about things like that. Walter Paul, the German bonsai professional, I think he worries a lot less about those kind of things, and he has what many people consider to be more natural or naturalistic looking trees. So I'm just really going around and trimming off some of this longer growth, and again just sort of trying to bring things back a little. So again, I've got a fan shape there, and I'm just cutting some of that off, so I've lost that amount of foliage, and just working through the tree doing this. So what I should end up with is thinner pads of foliage. Once I put a bit of wire on here, some of this will be brought in a bit tighter, and up here in this particular part of the tree is an example of where I've got a lot of sort of loose foliage. It's quite thick and dense, but it's a bit disorganized and all over the place, so it needs trimming and some judicious pruning, I think. And a bit of wiring, so this long straight bit here, for example, if I put a bit of wire in there, I could sort of bend it back on itself and then back out again, and then also position those in a sort of horizontal plane and end up with something that looks a bit more pleasing. It's all just very disorganised up here at the moment. To say this tree has been sat on my benches, pretty neglected, and I've not really done any work on it since it was initially styled. It's got these gin on it, which I put in when it was initially styled, and the intention was to make it look like an undulating dragon. So this bit here, for example, is the dragon's tail with the spikes on it, and initially it did have a bit more movement in it, and I found that what happened was I took the wire off and over a period of time it sort of lost some of that movement. I rewired it again and put the movement back in, and then again once I took the wire out it sort of lost again some of that effect. So I think it's one of those cases of having to accept it is what it is now. It's a little bit of a frustrating tree because it is a bit shapeless. And I think in these situations either it's a lost cause or you just try and move the thing forward a little at a time. Got a bit of a little stump of a dead branch in there, I'll just take that off. I don't want to be putting any more gin or sherry into this. I think it has far enough in there already. Question is, how much of this do I remove? I think I'm going for quite a big cut in there. I removed all of that, and what I will do is I'll put some wire in there and reposition that. It means some of this foliage up here now looks a bit heavy. And perhaps I can lower that into there with a bit of wiring. So pinch some of the tips of those out. There's still a lot going on up in the upper part of the tree here. It's quite fussy, and I think until perhaps I start wiring some of this into place, it might be difficult to see where I'm going with it. There is some downward growing foliage here I'm just taking out. I think really at this stage I need to get some wire on this and position some of the branches, and I think it will be a little bit clearer where I'm going with things once I've done that. Whatever I'm doing, I want to emphasise the gin and the shari, and if I can bring the foliage in close to that but not obscuring it, then that will contrast the foliage and the whiteness of the deadwood. This is one of those trees, it's got a mixture of the adult scale foliage on there. It's also got some of this juvenile foliage in there as well. It's not something to worry too much about. Over time you get foliage growing past that point, and then eventually you can remove this. It's usually the result of the tree being stressed in one form or another. Perhaps it's underwatered, perhaps too much foliage has been removed, and it's the tree's response to try and recover. A little bit of juvenile foliage is not really something to be overly concerned about. I think if the entire tree is covered in juvenile foliage, then you've probably screwed up big time somewhere. Okay, so that's as much as I'm doing on here today. I need to put wire on it before I can proceed and decide where some of this foliage is going, and then what I can get rid of as a result of that. Here are a couple of takeaways from this and my previous video. Not all junipers are made the same. Some have quite long, leggy, sparse growth, whilst others like Itogawa and Shimpaku have quite dense, tight foliage and make for much better bonsai. Don't be fooled by the unusual scale or needle foliage. In many respects, they can be treated just as you do deciduous trees. All the same chemical, biological and horticultural principles apply. So you can cut out the apical growth to promote back budding, and you can remove branches for shaping the tree and for styling. However, I would suggest that you don't remove more than about a third of the foliage in any one go. Don't, however, remove or cut back beyond green foliage. If you cut all the foliage off a particular branch, that branch will almost certainly die. Similarly, you cannot completely defoliate a juniper in the same way that you might, for example, a Japanese maple. If you remove all the foliage, there's no means of providing energy to that tree, and that tree will just simply die. They take very easily from cuttings and also from air layers, so you can propagate many from one plant. And so far I've just taken it for granted, but don't keep them indoors. Junipers are a hardy outdoor plant that typically grow in mountainous or desert areas and are exposed to extremes of temperature, both hot and cold, and they do need to experience the seasons. If you keep them indoors, it will be too dry for them. They will be starved of light. They won't experience those seasonal changes and go into dormancy and will almost certainly die. Thank you for watching. I hope you found something informative and useful in this video and the previous one. If you did, hit like, share, comment, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.